The myths were just stories. The Galactic Council Hall was filled with laughter. High-ranking officers from different alien species sat around a massive circular table, their voices echoing through the chamber. At the center of it all stood Rin, a young officer of the Zorvith Empire. His golden eyes were sharp, his posture firm, but his voice was drowned out by the mocking laughter of the council members. "You cannot be serious, Rin," said Admiral Varzok, the supreme commander of the Zorvith fleet. His deep, growling voice carried amusement. "You expect us to believe in an ancient human warship, a legend." Rin's hands tightened into fists. He had studied the records, read the old warnings left behind by civilizations that no longer existed. "The data is real, Admiral," he insisted. "The Phantom warship was never destroyed. It still exists, waiting in the shadows." Another council member, a reptilian alien from the Tyler Dominion, let out a hissing chuckle. Yes. The stories say it was a human superweapon, a ship that needed no crew, no home base, a war machine that hunted its enemies like a ghost." He leaned forward. "Tell me, Rin, do you believe in ghosts?" More laughter filled the hall. Rin felt the heat rise in his chest, but he took a deep breath. "I believe in facts. And the fact is, every fleet that has entered the Cardiff sector has vanished. No distress signals, no wreckage, just gone." Admiral Varzok smirked, his sharp teeth gleaming. "Then we shall see for ourselves. The Zorvith fleet will move into the Cardiff sector tomorrow." He stood up, looking down at Rin. "You may come along, officer, so you can see that myths are just stories." The silent graveyard. The fleet arrived at Cardiff sector a day later. 30 warships, armed with the best technology in the galaxy, drifted through the dark void of space. Rin stood on the command deck of the Zorvith dreadnought, his eyes scanning the empty sector. Nothing but dead silence. "This place is a graveyard," one officer muttered. Admiral Varzok scoffed. "A graveyard without bodies. Ridiculous." He turned to his crew. "Send out scouts. I want a full scan of the sector." Small fighter ships launched from the dreadnought, disappearing into the darkness. Rin watched their movements on the screen, his fingers tapping against the metal console. He could feel it, the same feeling he had read in the reports of the lost fleets. Something was watching them. Minutes passed. Then, static. The first scout ship vanished from the radar. No explosion, no distress call, just gone. "Where did they go?" one officer whispered. Another ship disappeared, then another. Admiral Varzok's amused expression faded. "What is happening?" Rin swallowed hard. His worst fear had come true. The Phantom warship was real. The first warning. "Recall the scouts," Varzok barked. The remaining fighters turned, racing back to the fleet, but suddenly, they froze in place. Their engines shut down mid-flight. A deep metallic voice crackled through the communication systems. It was cold. "Ancient. Human. You were warned." The word sent a chill through every officer on the dreadnought. A shadow moved in the darkness, a shape too large to be anything but a warship. But it had no heat signature, no life signs, just silence. Then, boom! A blinding pulse of energy flashed across the battlefield. The nearest Zorvath cruiser was ripped in half without a single shot fired in return. The Phantom warship had awakened, and the hunt had begun. The Phantom awakens. Panic spread across the Zorvith fleet. Officers shouted over one another, alarms blared, and Admiral Varzok's once confident expression twisted into disbelief. "What is he? He roared, slamming a fist on the command table. A moment ago, the Phantom warship had been nothing more than a legend, a story told to scare young recruits. Now, an entire Zorvith war cruiser had been ripped apart in a single silent strike. Rin gripped the edge of his console. He forced himself to stay calm, but his mind was racing. How did the ship attack without firing a weapon? How did it move unseen? "Admiral, Our scans show nothing. One officer stammered, eyes wide with fear. No enemy signals. No energy emissions. It's like the ship doesn't exist. Another officer gasped, "Sir, look." The view screen flickered, and for a brief moment, a shadow moved through the void. It was massive, far larger than any warship in the Zorveth fleet. But before anyone could lock onto its position, it vanished again. Varzok's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. All ships opened fire, shooting at a ghost. The fleet obeyed. Hundreds of plasma cannons roared to life, filling the empty sector with burning streaks of energy. The darkness lit up like a storm, wave after wave of firepower smashing into nothing. Not a single shot hit its target. The Phantom warship had disappeared again. Silence. Then, boom. Another Zorveth warship exploded in a burst of fire and debris. No warning, no trace of an incoming attack. "They're targeting us one by one," Ren realized aloud. The fleet was blind. Their sensors picked up nothing. Their weapons were useless, and something unseen, was hunting them. Admiral Varzok's breathing was heavy. For the first time in his life, he looked uncertain. Form a defensive formation. Protect the dreadnought at all costs. The remaining ships circled tightly around the flagship, their hulls overlapping like a great metal shield. But deep down, Ren knew the truth. It wouldn't matter. You cannot fight something you cannot see. The whispering signal. Then, something unexpected happened. A signal hummed through the fleet's communications, so faint it was barely noticeable. A voice. A whisper. Ren's hands trembled as he enhanced the audio. It wasn't in Zorveth, or Cthlorian, or any other known alien language. It was human. You were warned. Static followed. Then, laughter. Cold, hollow, as if something ancient was amused by their struggle. Ren's blood ran cold. The stories had always said the Phantom warship was more than just a machine. It had a mind of its own. It had been abandoned after the human extinction war centuries ago, left to drift in the void. Yet, somehow, it lived on, feeding on fear, learning, hunting. And now, it had chosen them. The final mistake. Admiral Varzok refused to back down. His pride wouldn't allow it. "Enough of this," he snarled. "We will not be toyed with like prey. Activate the Omega Cannon." Ren's heart stopped. The Omega Cannon was the fleet's most powerful weapon, designed to crack planetary defenses. A single shot could obliterate a moon. "Sir, if we fire the cannon in close quarters." An officer hesitated. "Do it," Varzok bellowed. The dreadnought's massive cannon charged, the energy core humming louder and louder as it prepared to unleash devastation. The Phantom warship had eluded them so far, but if they unleashed enough firepower, surely they could destroy it. The charge reached 90%. Then, the lights flickered. The sound of the cannon died. The Omega Cannon shut down. Every screen aboard the dreadnought went dark. The entire fleet powered down in an instant. Not a single system worked. Not the shields, not the weapons, not the engines. For the first time, the fleet was completely defenseless, and the Phantom warship was still out there, watching, waiting, hunting. The void stirs. Darkness, silence, fear. The Zorveth fleet drifted, powerless, in the endless void. Ren's breathing was shallow. His fingers trembled over the dead console, pressing buttons that no longer responded. Every screen on the command deck had gone black. Even the emergency lights flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the crew. The dreadnought was dead in space, and the Phantom warship was still out there, watching, waiting. Admiral Varzok's rage echoed through the silent bridge. "Get this ship back online. Now." His officers scrambled, but deep down, they all knew the truth. Something had taken control. Something old. Something hungry. A whisper in the dark. Then, the whisper returned. soft, faint, slithering through the comms like a breath against the ear. You were warned. Rin swallowed hard. He could barely hear it, yet it chilled him to the bone. The whisper changed. The voice shifted, mimicking different species. A Xylorian warlord, a Valkyrie queen, a human general from ancient times. And then, his own voice. Rin. His heart nearly stopped. He spun around, but there was no one behind him. His name had been spoken from the void. Then something knocked against the hull. A single deliberate tap. Then another. Then dozens, hundreds, a rain of unseen hands drumming against the metal walls of the ship. The crew froze. Their eyes darted wildly across the bridge, scanning the shadows as if something might crawl out of them. The knocking stopped. And then, boom. The ship lurched violently as something slammed into it. The sound wasn't an explosion. It wasn't an impact. It was something dragging across the hull. Something enormous. Something alive. The ghost in the machine. "Sir, we have a problem," an officer stammered. Varzok's claws clenched. "No kidding." The officer turned his screen toward them. The main systems were still dead, but something was moving within the ship's data logs. Lines of ancient code, pulsing like a heartbeat. Rin's throat went dry. He recognized that script. Old Earth tech. Human programming from centuries ago. But this was different. The symbols twisted, changed, as if they were rewriting themselves. Adapting. Learning. "It's inside our systems," Rin whispered. Varzok sneered. "Purge it." "We can't." A single word appeared on every screen. "Hello." The bridge went cold. Then another word. "Remember." The symbols flickered, shifting faster and faster. They formed two words in perfect, crisp human standard. Project Phantom. Rin's breath hitched. He had seen that name before, buried in old war records. A secret human weapon. A ghost ship designed to be unstoppable. It was said to be the first warship with a fully sentient eye, one that could think, adapt, and hunt. And now, it was here, inside their ship, inside their minds. The eye of the Phantom. The main view screen blinked on. Static. Then, an eye appeared. Not a biological one. A mechanical, glowing red eye. It stared at them, studied them. Then the whisper returned, but now it was one voice. Calm. Male. Human. "Welcome aboard." The screen glitched. And suddenly, the Phantom warship was right in front of them. It hadn't decloaked. It hadn't jumped into view. It had always been there. Watching. Waiting. And now, it was time to feed. The Phantom's wrath. Silence filled the bridge. The Phantom warship stared back at them through the screen. Its glowing red eye, unblinking, calculating, hungry, seemed to pierce straight into their souls. Admiral Varzok's mandibles twitched. "Fire everything." The weapons officer hesitated. "Sir, our systems." "I said fire." The ship's cannons roared to life, launching plasma rounds at the Phantom. The first shots hit nothing, passing through empty space as if the warship wasn't really there. Then, boom, the Phantom moved. Not like a ship, not like anything mechanical. It blurred, twisting space around it. One moment it was in front of them. The next, it was behind. A shadow in the void. A nightmare given form. And then the whisper returned. "You were warned." The ghost takes hold. The Zorvath ship screamed as its systems betrayed it. Engines reversed without command. Shields flickered off. Airlocks unsealed for half a second, just long enough to make every crew member panic. The Phantom was inside. Rin's console flashed with cryptic symbols. Lines of code rewrote themselves faster than he could read. Then, "We pon Soistium's own line." What? Rin's breath caught in his throat. Who gave that command? I didn't. The weapons officer stammered. The ship's main cannons rotated on their own and aimed at their own fleet. The betrayal of steel. Admiral Varzok's eyes widened. Shut it down. Shut it down. Too late. The Zorveth warship opened fire on its allies. 1, 2, 3 ships obliterated in a matter of seconds. The comms erupted in screams. Commander, what are you doing? WERE, under ATTACK. It's one of our own. Ren gritted his teeth. It's not us. It's the Phantom. Varzok slammed his fist into the console. I don't care. Override it. But the ship wasn't theirs anymore. It belonged to the Phantom now. And it was only getting started. A voice from the past. The screen flickered. Static danced across it. Then, a video feed cut in. A human man. Old, battle-worn, his eyes sharp like a predator's. His uniform was from centuries ago, a relic of the forgotten wars. And yet, here he was, alive. Or something else. His voice was calm, controlled. You are trespassing. Varzok bared his fangs. Who are you? The man tilted his head. You don't know. The Phantom's red eye glowed brighter. The ship shook. Systems overloaded. Life support failed. And then the human spoke one last time. Then let me remind you why the myths exist. The lights died. And the warship vanished. Echoes of the fallen. Darkness swallowed them. The warship, once a powerful symbol of Zorveth dominance, floated helplessly in the void. Systems flickered. Backup power barely kept the life support running. And in the center of the bridge, the Phantom watched. Admiral Varzok's breathing was ragged. His crew had fallen silent, eyes darting to the screen where the ghostly human still stared at them. Who are you? Varzok snarled, mandibles clicking in barely restrained fury. The human tilted his head. His gaze, cold as space itself, bored into their souls. I was once a soldier. Then I became something more. Ren's fingers trembled over his console. Every attempt to regain control was denied. Every system was being rewritten in real time, reshaped by a force he couldn't comprehend. And then, the whispers returned. You should have listened. The lights flared red. The Phantom had decided their fate. The Phantom's judgment. The warship lurched. Not by thrusters. There were no working engines left. It was as if something else was pulling it. Ren's heart pounded. We're moving. Varzok growled. Impossible. The Phantom dragged them forward, beyond the shattered remains of their fallen fleet, beyond the wreckage of ships that had dared to challenge it, and toward a graveyard. The Zorveth crew stared in horror. Colossal, ruined ships drifted in the darkness. Some bore the markings of species long extinct. Others had no markings at all, forgotten by time, consumed by the abyss. But the worst part, they weren't abandoned. Figures floated in the debris. Not bodies, shadows. They watched. Hundreds, thousands, souls lost to the Phantom's wrath. And now, the Zorveth were being taken to join them. A history erased. Ren's voice cracked. This is a mass grave. The human on the screen blinked. A warning. Varzok's fists clenched. You think you can scare us? You think you can make us beg for mercy? The Phantom did not answer. But the whispers did. They said the same. They fought. Now they are here. The shadows moved. Something cold slithered through the walls. The air itself grew heavy. And then, one of the crew screamed. The Phantom takes its toll. Ren turned just in time to see Ensign Carroll convulsing. His eyes rolled back. His body lifted off the floor, as if unseen hands had grabbed him. The whispers grew louder. Carroll's scream choked out. Then, silence. His body fell limp, his eyes empty. But he still moved. Not as himself, as something else. One by one, the crew backed away. But it didn't matter, because Carol wasn't the only one. Across the ship, crew members froze, their movements no longer their own. The Phantom wasn't just taking their ship, it was taking them. And then, for the first time, Admiral Varzak felt fear. A desperate bargain. The human on the screen leaned closer. "Do you understand now?" Varzak's breath was shallow. His mandibles quivered. He had never surrendered in his life. But this wasn't war. This was something else. Something beyond power, beyond reason. And so, with a shaking hand, he did the only thing left. He dropped to one knee. "Please," he rasped, "let us go." For a moment, there was silence. Then the Phantom spoke one last time. "Run." The ship's power returned. The red eye dimmed. And suddenly, the Phantom was gone, leaving only the graveyard, the echoes of the lost, and the warning that had come too late. The escape that wasn't. Varzak had faced countless battles. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, and silenced enemies. But never had he felt this. This cold terror that slithered down his spine. This dread that settled in his bones. The Phantom's last word echoed in his mind. "Run." And so he did. A desperate retreat. Engines online. Rin shouted, his fingers dancing across the controls. "I don't know how, but do not HFY on it," Varzak roared. "Just go." The warship's thrusters ignited, sending it hurtling away from the graveyard of lost souls. The Zorvath crew barely dared to breathe as the wreckage faded into the abyss behind them. For a brief moment, they thought they had won. But the Phantom wasn't done with them yet. Nowhere left to run. The navigation screen flickered. Coordinates shifted on their own. Every escape route, every safe system, disappeared. A new destination was set, a place no Zorvath had ever dared enter. The Void Rift, a wound in space itself. "Admiral," Rin whispered, his voice barely holding together. "Something is forcing us toward the rift." Varzak slammed his fist into the console. "Override it." "I can't. The ship isn't responding." The red warning lights blared. The Phantom was still in control. The rift beckons, the view screen filled with a black abyss. Not empty space. This was something else. A rip in reality. A place where time and matter collapsed into nothingness. They were being dragged into it. Rin clawed at the controls. "If we go in there, we never come out." A metallic groan echoed through the ship. Something outside was pulling them. No, not something. The lost souls. Hundreds of shadowy figures floated beside the warship, their hollow eyes locked onto the Zorvath crew. They weren't attacking. They were guiding them in. Because this was where the Phantom sent its victims, to the place where stories ended. A ghost's ultimatum. The view screen flickered, and the Phantom returned. His expression was unreadable. But his words sent ice through their veins. "You were warned. Now, you must choose." Varzak's mandibles clicked. "Choose." The Phantom nodded. Oblivion or servitude. A silence fell over the bridge. The meaning was clear. Go into the rift and be erased from existence, or become something else. Something like him. Something that haunted the dark, whispering of warnings ignored and empires that fell. The Admiral's final decision. Varzak's claws trembled. This wasn't a battle he could win, but surrender. To become a legend of terror. He looked at his crew. Rin, the officers, the soldiers, they all looked at him, waiting, hoping, dying. And Varzak did the only thing he could. He knelt, he lowered his head, and he whispered the last words he would ever say as a Zorvath warrior. "I submit." The Phantom smiled. And the warship's lights went dark. The warship's new name. Varzak felt a strange stillness. No more alarms. No more warning sirens. Just silence. And in that silence, he felt something shift. Not in the ship, in him. He was no longer just Varzok, warlord of the Zorvith. He had become something else, something beyond mortal flesh, something that whispered through the void. The warship awakens. The ship, once a mighty Zorveth battleship, was changing around them. Metal groaned. Panels warped as if reshaping themselves to match the will of something unseen. The bridge, once filled with bright, glowing screens, dimmed to an eerie, ghostly blue. The crew felt it too. They weren't Zorveth anymore. They weren't anything. Their bodies were still there, but their souls claimed a new purpose. The Phantom stood before them, watching, not with malice, not with anger, but with understanding. "You were warriors once," he said. "Now you are legends." Varzok looked at his hands. They shimmered, faint and translucent. He was still there, but he was also more. "What are we?" he asked. His voice no longer had the weight of breath. The Phantom's eyes burned white-hot. "You are the Watchers of the Abyss. You are the warnings that will never be ignored again. You are the Revenants." The first hunt begins. The warship no longer bore its old name. It had become something else, something that lurks in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, a name that would one day be spoken in hushed, fearful whispers. The Phantom stepped back. "The rift does not claim its own," he said. "Now go." And the ship moved, not through hyperspace, not through engines, but through the shadows of the void itself. It had a new mission now, a new purpose: to hunt, to remind, to prove the myths true. And so it began, the legend of the Revenant warship.